charged up the steep dirt wall, but it lost momentum and traction, causing it to tumble and roll multiple times down the long hillside before crashing hard into the event's inflatable gate. The green and black buggy crossed the rough rocky terrain and accelerated up the dusty slope. Near the top, it lost traction, slid backward quickly, and tipped onto its side on the sandy ground. The purple buggy rounded the corner and charged up the narrow dirt slope, but it suddenly lost traction, slid backward, and flipped onto its roof. The black and purple buggy accelerated hard up the steep rock face, reared up, and flipped several times through the air before slamming into the dirt hillside. The heavy impact completely snapped the front left wheel off before the vehicle finally came to a stop. The black and red buggy tried to power up the steep, muddy slope, but it lost balance, flipped backward, and rolled over twice before the driver regained control. The silver-gray buggy accelerated over a rocky ledge and charged up the rough slope, but it lost balance, flipped over, and tumbled upside down into the deep ravine below. The burgundy buggy charged straight up the steep rock face, nearly standing upright before flipping backward down the slope. One wheel broke off during the crash, but the vehicle managed to land back on all four wheels. The blue buggy made a sharp U-turn, then immediately hit the throttle and charged up the steep dirt wall. The front end quickly rose nearly vertical before the vehicle tipped backward, flipped over, and came to rest upside down with all four wheels in the air. As the off-road vehicle attempted to climb a steep cliff, it suddenly lost balance, flipped over, and ended up upside down with all four wheels facing upwards. The silver and white buggy struggled to climb a narrow, steep rock face coated with mud, but halfway up it lost momentum, flipped backward, and came to rest upside down with all four wheels pointing skyward in the ravine below. The gray steel frame buggy accelerated over a gentle slope, then carried its momentum straight into the steep dirt wall ahead. When it reached the higher section, the front end lifted the vehicle, flipped backward in a full rollover, and then managed to regain its balance. The bright red buggy raced along the slope and launched off a high dirt ledge, completing a full mid-air flip before landing incredibly smoothly on all four wheels. The silver steel frame buggy squeezed through a narrow trail beside the rugged rock wall, then revved hard and charged up the steep dirt slope, only to end in a backward rollover. The red buggy started by climbing a gentle slope in the forest, then accelerated to take on the steep dirt wall on the other side. But when it reached the steeper section, it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward in a full rollover, and came to rest upside down right beside a tree stump, trailing a cloud of white smoke. The gray buggy roared up the steep dirt cliff, but because it was carrying too much speed, it was violently thrown upward, lost traction, and flipped backward. It then slammed hard into the hillside, causing one wheel to break off before finally coming to a stop at the bottom of the slope. A powerful start with a roaring engine, hurtling forward like an arrow through the wind, and then the finish. The two vehicles launch hard right from the start, picking up speed fast. The lead vehicle hits the terrain bump, suddenly loses control, flips 180 degrees, and ends up upside down right on the track. The vehicle starts building speed and charges up the steep dirt hill, with the engine roaring in a powerful climb. It makes it more than halfway up the slope smoothly, but right at the most intense moment, the long-legged, it climbs up fairly smoothly at first, but just as the driver tries to throttle out and brake onto the bank, the vehicle suddenly changes its mind and pitches straight up at a full 90 degrees. The landing comes down on the roof, leaving the vehicle upside down right next to the bushes. The blue SUV performed a spectacular acceleration, and this was the result. The SUV flipped over and lay upside down on the muddy ground. The gray Jeep SUV was taking on a challenging off-road climb, trying to crawl over a steep and dangerous rock ledge. The gray buggy continued with an extremely intense rock climbing challenge. The vehicle roared and accelerated hard up the vertical rock wall in the forest. As a result, the buggy tipped over to the left, rolled 1.5 times, and ended up lying in the dirt rut below. The buggy revved its engine to full throttle, hurtling up a high mound of earth, soaring into the air at a dizzying height. The gray buggy pulled off an extremely reckless jump. The vehicle carved through the turn, revved hard, causing it to lose control and tumble several times back down the hill. The gray buggy had an extremely heart-stopping rock climbing attempt right beside the river. The buggy flying an American flag revved hard and charged up the steep embankment. The hard impact at high speed sent the truck flying into the air, flipping 2.5 times before crashing violently into the bushes and landing upside down. The dark blue buggy was trying to get over an obstacle made of huge tires, flipped backward, and ended up stuck upside down in the tire pile, with smoke pouring out everywhere. The black buggy lost its balance while climbing the steep slope, flipped onto its roof, and then rolled 1.5 times down the hill in a thick cloud of dust. The buggy charged up a steep, muddy dirt embankment, Because the slope was too steep, the vehicle suddenly reared straight up, flipped backward, and ended up stuck right in the middle of the hill. The buggy sped up the muddy dirt slope, but it lost momentum, lurched forward, flipped over, and ended up lying upside down on the slope. The gray-striped buggy was climbing the steep, muddy dirt slope when it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and came back down onto the slope. The yellow and black buggy number 100 charged up the steep, sandy slope but lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and ended up upside down at the bottom of the hill. The white off-road vehicle number 121 accelerated hard up a steep, sandy slope, but just as it reached the top, it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and then tumbled several times all the way back down to the bottom of the hill. The buggy was climbing near the top of a sandy slope when it lost momentum, slid backward, then stood upright and flipped over. The vehicle rolled several times down the hillside and came to a stop upside down. The blue buggy charged up the steep, rocky dirt slope, but when it got very close to the top, it lost momentum, flipped backward, and fell back down to the bottom of the hill. The orange and silver buggy number 29 charged up the steep, sandy slope but lost momentum. The vehicle reared up, flipped backward, rolled, once tore off part of its front bodywork, and then landed back on all four wheels at the bottom of the hill. The bluish-purple buggy hurtled up the rough, rocky slope before hitting a high rock outcrop. The front of the vehicle was thrown up, causing it to flip over, roll, and finally come to rest upside down at the foot of the hill. The buggy sped up a rough, rocky slope, but as soon as it reached the rocky outcrop at the top, it lost momentum, lurched forward, flipped over, and rolled down the hillside. The black buggy charged up the rocky slope in the middle of the forest, but it lost momentum, halfway up, reared up, flipped backward, and rolled back down. The maroon buggy charged up the rough, sandy dirt slope. Just after clearing a large dirt ledge, it bounced hard, rolled over at the top of the hill, and then slid back down. The red buggy accelerated powerfully up the sandy slope, but when it reached a bend halfway up, it lost momentum, tilted sharply, and then overturned. The off-road vehicle hurtled up an extremely steep slope, its front end lifted off the ground, and the vehicle flipped over and landed on the ground. The blue buggy was attempting to navigate a narrow, flooded road when climbing a steep incline it lost balance, flipped over, and ended up lying upside down in the middle of the road. The black buggy charged up the steep, rocky slope, but near the top it suddenly reared up, flipped backward, then rolled back down and struck a small tree trunk below. The gray buggy tried to climb the steep dirt bank along the narrow trail, but it suddenly reared up, flipped backward, and ended up upside down in the muddy, water-filled path. The buggy charged up the steep, rocky slope, but it suddenly reared up, flipped backward, and rolled down the rocky hillside. red buggy successfully made it through the narrow, muddy, rock-filled section, but when it charged up the steep dirt bank ahead, the front end suddenly lifted the vehicle, flipped backward, and ended up upside down. The red off-road vehicle number 3 charged up the vertical rock face, but when it reached the top, it lost momentum, flipped backward, rolled once, and fell straight into the water. The red buggy charged hard up the rough dirt slope in the forest, but when it reached the steeper section higher up, it lost momentum, flipped backward, and tumbled several times down to the bottom of the hill. The dark gray steel framed off-road vehicle charged up a steep rocky slope, launching into the air before flipping backward and rolling down to land on its side. The purple buggy charged up the steep rocky slope, but it suddenly reared up, flipped backward, and landed upside down on the hillside before striking a small tree trunk. The dark gray buggy charged up the rough dirt slope in the forest, but when it reached the steep upper section, it lost momentum and flipped backward onto its roof. A gray buggy with red graphics charged hard up the steep rocky dirt slope, but when it reached the taller section near the top, it lost momentum, flipped backward, and ended up upside down on the sandy dirt slope below. The red frame buggy charged up a rough, rocky dirt slope, but when it reached the steeper upper section, it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and then rolled several times all the way down to the bottom of the hill. The silver gray buggy sped through the inflatable gate and followed a rough sandy dirt track, but as it tried to climb a dirt ledge on the turn, the vehicle tilted sharply and flipped onto its roof. The white steel frame buggy charged hard up the dirt slope, but when it reached a steeper section higher up, the vehicle lost balance, hit a tree stump, then flipped backward and tumbled several times all the way down to the bottom of the hill. The off-road vehicle charged up a steep, muddy concrete slope. However, as it neared the summit, it lost momentum, reared up, flipped over backward, and finally landed upside down in a pit below. The black and white buggy launched over a large dirt ridge and kept accelerating up the slope. However, when it slammed into a high dirt wall ahead, the front end shot upward, sending the vehicle into a backward rollover before it tumbled several times back down the hill. The red buggy tried to accelerate hard up a steep, dusty slope, but near the top it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and rolled a few times down the hillside before finally landing back on its wheels. The white steel frame buggy sped through the inflatable gate, launched over a dirt ridge, and then continued over an obstacle made of large tires. After that, it took a turn and accelerated up a steep, rocky dirt slope, but because it lost momentum, it flipped backward and ended up upside down on the slope. The buggy accelerated hard up the steep rock face, but with too much momentum, the wheels struck a tree stump, sending the vehicle into the air. It pitched upward, flipped backward, and crashed back down onto the ground. The black off-road vehicle accelerated up the sheer cliff face. The extreme steepness caused the front end to rear up sharply, flipping the vehicle backward. It completed a full rotation before landing back on all four wheels. The buggy accelerated hard up the rocky dirt trail, but when it reached the rough rocky incline above it, lost momentum, reared. The buggy accelerated hard up the steep rocky dirt slope, but halfway up it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and ended up upside down at the bottom of the hill, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. The black buggy tried to accelerate up a steep trail filled with large rocks. After making it past the rough rocky section and getting close to the top, the vehicle suddenly lost balance and flipped backward. It then rolled onto its side and ended up blocking the trail.